Hello, I'm Chrissy Seaton. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and thank you for those who are subscribing. And please, if you're new to this channel, subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when there's another video. Well, today we're going to be discussing the Genesis series, continuing with number 13, and that is to do with rebuilding the world. The world has changed and there is much to be done. And we're even told in Torah Anthology on page, let me just check for you, on page 379, it even tells us that the climate changed. Prior to the flood, it was pretty much spring all year round. So a very, very ambient, beautiful atmosphere and comfortable occasions every day. It was not a climate that you had to struggle with. However, that changes after the flood. And so what I'm going to do now is just read you a brief introduction. Now, we are in chapter 9 of Genesis now, and in this video, we will be discussing verses 1 to 7. So there is just a general comment written in the beginning of the Torah comments. So I'm just going to read those, and then we'll read the appropriate verses. It's called Rebuilding a Ruined World. Above, the Torah is recorded Noah's offering as his personal token of devotion to God, and it recorded God's resolve that the world would continue. Now, these two resolutions are translated into the combination of blessings and charge that God conferred upon Noah and his progeny. The world had benefited from God's blessing to Adam, that's in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, until the generation of the flood abrogated it with their corruption. When Noah left the ark, God renewed the blessing of prolific procreation by repeating it to Noah and his sons. So that's just the general introduction to these verses. So let's look now at verses 1 to 4. I'll read those from Torah. We'll look at the comments that Torah makes about those verses, and then we'll look and see what there is in Torah Anthology that might give us another layer of understanding and knowledge. So, verse 1, chapter 9. God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the land. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens. In everything that moves on earth and in all the fish of the sea, in your hand they are given. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. Like the green herbage, I have given you everything. But flesh, with its soul, its blood, you shall not eat." I'll just repeat verse 4. "But flesh, with its soul, its blood, you shall not eat." So we'll pause there, because I'm thinking that you're probably guessing, if you're a Noahide, what verse 4 there refers to. And if you said it's the law Ava Minahai, you would be correct, because that means do not eat the flesh of a still living animal. That's actually the 7th commandment, and it was given, as we've read, to Noah when he exited the ark. So it's nothing is missed. Every detail is there. So we're going to have a look now at what Torah Anthology is going to tell us about this. And that will be page 380 to 382 of Torah Anthology, Genesis, Volume 1. So, God promises Noah that to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. This is a blessing that God gave Noah and his children, that they be fertile and increase. When Noah it goes on and says here, when Noah was born, man regained his previous advantage over the animals. It was therefore said regarding him, this one will bring relief from our work. And don't forget, Noah was also what we would refer to as the father of modern day agriculture. He invented tools, etc., to till the soil. And so in many ways, he was destined to be a special individual. When Noah was born, I've read that, yes. And that is quoted in Genesis 5, verse 29, meaning this one will bring relief from our work. Now, prior to the flood, the people had become so wicked that they once again lost this advantage and were terrified of wild animals. Because of this fear, that Noah was rescued when people attacked him while he was entering the ark. Lions surrounded the ark and frightened them away, meaning frightened the people away. And so that's an interesting thing. It goes on further now and says, after the flood, God blessed Noah that all the animals would fear man and be in dread of him. Therefore, as long as human beings are alive, all creatures fear him and flee at the sight of him. They are even apprehensive in the presence of a newborn infant. Now, I'll just pause here, and I'm just adding a little bit of my thoughts. I've been reared around animals, dogs, cattle, horses all my life. And one of the major rules that you must do is if you have a new baby and you're bringing it home, especially the firstborn, and you have a house dog, for instance, a pet, or dogs that, come in and out of the house, it's most important that you gradually introduce that baby under strict supervision. You put it down so that the dog can sniff it. That's their normal way of introducing and familiarising themselves, and sniff and nudge and have a little look. And you have to do that. And don't forget, if a baby suddenly cries, that can frighten a dog too. So you should never leave a newborn baby, a helpless little baby, alone with any animal. And I'm amazed at people that will do that and say the dog won't do anything. Well, it won't if after it's been suitably attuned and accustomed to the baby. But first up, this is a strange phenomena entering their home. The dog thinks it's their home, and that the parents of the baby are actually the dog's parents, and suddenly this little squawking pink things come into the house and is demanding all their attention. But I just thought I would mention that. So that's a perfect example of how you have to introduce a baby very, very carefully to the family pet dog. Now, it goes on and says that there are many cases on record where lions have attacked people and have eaten them. In such cases, the individual had committed a sin for which the penalty was death. God does not let the criminal go scot-free. God has many messengers to punish those who deserve it. In many cases, these agents are wild animals. So even if someone committed a murder and there were no witnesses and they were never sort of a suspect, God has other ways of punishing that person for taking another human life. And sometimes it can be an animal. Before a wild animal can attack a human being, he must appear to it like an animal. In other words, the animal perceives that human being as another animal. That is, it qualifies it when they behave like an animal, when the human is behaving like an animal. Only then do they dare attack him. So that's very interesting. So therefore, wild beasts will only attack a person who acts like an animal, giving in to his passions. And don't ever forget, animals have an incredible inbuilt instinct for danger, or if someone's in trouble or fire or anything like that, their instincts are often triggered long before the event. We hear incredible stories when a tsunami hit some years ago, and people said that, before the tsunami hit, their animals behaved strangely, and so they do have a sort of an ancient instinct that God has given them. If a person does good works and has pity on the poor, he will never lose his human aura. So in other words, if you're going to behave and act like an animal, you're going to give off the aura of an animal that's recognised by another animal. But if you're a pious and righteous person and do good, then you retain that human aura, whereby animals are wary of you. God was in Genesis chapter 1 verse 28, God was telling Adam, if you act properly, you can dominate all living creatures. If not, they will dominate you. Now we go over here now and says, this is very interesting. Now, that verse 4, remember that I repeated? Well, that is where the 7th Noahide law comes from. Noah was given permission to eat meat after the flood. And that is where that verse 4 comes from. That's what it's founded in God's giving permission for us to eat meat, which prior to the flood, we weren't allowed to eat meat, or those weren't allowed to eat meat. So it says, the eating of meat, the first 10 generations from Adam until Noah did not have the authority to slaughter any living creatures for food. When Noah left the ark, God gave him permission to slaughter and eat the flesh of animals, birds, and fish. At this time, God also commanded Noah not to eat the flesh from a living animal. That's Ava Minahai. As long as there is any life in an animal, it is forbidden to eat of its flesh. If any part is cut off from a living animal, it is forbidden as food. It is similarly forbidden to drink blood from a living animal, even for a Gentile. So there you go. It's very plain, and one of the 7 universal commandments that God gave to Adam forbade the eating of flesh from a living animal. Why did God have to repeat this commandment to Noah? Until Noah's time, it was forbidden to eat any flesh. Since God now permitted Noah to kill animals and to eat their meat, it might be thought that even flesh from a living animal was permitted. Therefore, this prohibition had to be reiterated. There is an important reason why it is not permitted for Adam to eat flesh, but Noah was later permitted to do so. During the first 10 generations, animals had not benefited from man in any way. It was therefore not appropriate that man kill them and eat them. But since God allowed a pair from each species to escape the flood only because of Noah's merit, he had a claim on them, meaning Noah had a claim on them. If not for Noah, all animal species would have become extinct. Since he saved them, he was given permission to kill and eat them. And also, I guess you've got to also consider that this is a whole new world. The climates have changed. There's not going to be spring all year round. Man's going to have to do hard work. He's going to have to do work in rebuilding the earth and the population. And there's going to be a need for protein as well. And of course, the richest source of protein is in meat. And iron comes from red meat, etc. So there's a lot, because of, I just think that, everything has done a turnaround now. Man's not going to get an easy ride any longer. He's got to pay the fare and do the work. And it also goes on and says that it says that Noah involved in his relationship to the animals before the flood. It was fitting that people be fair game to the animals and they be able to kill and eat them. But after the flood, the animals were commanded not to harm human beings. God thus said, "From the hand of every wild beast I will demand an account." Another allusion to this verse, and this is quite interesting. If a person commits murder without witnesses, the courts cannot impose any penalty. I was talking about this before. Nevertheless, the murderer should not think that God will let him go free. God has many ways to extract revenge, which is just repeating what I'd told. Even the beasts can act as God's agent in punishing the murderer. So there we go. So these things, promises were made to Noah when he left the ark for an important reason. When Noah and his children left the ark, they looked out and saw an entire world destroyed. It was desolate and empty, nothing left standing. They themselves had suffered during the flood. They began to weep. They had lost many friends and relatives, and we often overlook that fact that they would have had family and friends that, just gone in the blink of an eye. But also they had three major concerns. And the first one was they were much afraid of the wild animals. They were vastly outnumbered by the animals and they felt they were susceptible to attack. The second one was they were afraid they would not have enough food to eat. The earth was completely desolate. There wasn't a single plant or tree that had survived. Even though Noah had taken along all kinds of seeds in the ark to replenish the world, they would require time to grow, of course. I'll just turn this page. So they felt they were in great danger of dying of starvation. But so the third thing promises they were very concerned about strife among the brothers as well. There was fear that one might kill another, like Cain had killed Abel, and you can't blame them for thinking that, since there was no authority to instill respect for law and order. So I will pause there and we'll return to Torah and their comments. So just hold that thought, law and order. So let's go on now and look at verses 5 to 7. And verse 5 says, remember, law and order. However, your blood, which belongs to your souls, I will demand. Of every beast will I demand it, but of every man, for that of his brother, I will demand the soul of man. Whoever, verse 6 says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God he made man. And you be fruitful and multiply, teem on the earth and multiply on it. That's the end of verse 7. So here we have quite a few action-packed things in those last couple of verses. So let's take a look at what Torah comments say about this. So we pick up, first of all, let's look at the comments that Torah has made regarding verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'll read those because they are important. Verse 1 comment, be fruitful and multiply. These words would be repeated in verse 7. Here it is a blessing that the human race would be prolific. In verse 7, it is commanded to beget children. When Noah left the ark and saw the world destroyed with only 4 human couples still alive, he was dismayed and fearful. God allayed his concerns by giving him this blessing that the world would become repopulated. And we read the Torah anthology comments before in relation to these verses. So now you're seeing this ties it together. That's why I read the Torah anthology comments first. Verse 2, the fear of you. Lest Noah be afraid that the few surviving people would be in constant danger from the hordes of animals in the world, God assured him that he had implanted in animals an instinctive fear of human beings. Okay. The Zohar explains that in man's ideal state, the image of God in which he was created would be sufficient to frighten animals. Remember we learned about the aura? Which are an infinitely lower order of life. But when the generation of the flood degraded itself and sank to the level of animals, it forfeited this aura. Now God restored that blessing. This concept means that as long as man is true to his godly image, he need not fear beasts. But if he descends from his calling, after the fashion of the generation of the flood, he must indeed fear the beasts of the wild. Verse 3. God now gave Noah and his descendant a right that had never been given to Adam or his progeny. It was permission to eat meat. Noah was given the right to eat meat, just as God had given Adam the right to eat vegetation, because had it not been for the righteousness of Noah, no life would have survived the flood. And he had toiled over the animals and attended to their needs in the ark. Of him was it said, you shall eat the toil of your hands. Of him, and that is Psalm 128, verse 2. Thus Noah had acquired rights over them, meaning the animals. He now had the animals were now beholding to mankind now. Now, verse 4 goes on and says, but flesh with its soul. This command limits the permission to eat meat. Limits. Doesn't forbid it. It limits. It is forbidden to eat a limb taken from a living animal. Accordingly, the verse states that flesh is prohibited while life is still in the animal, and that this prohibition applies to its blood as well. And that is a very important thing to understand. So, but not only the prohibition of eating flesh or blood from a still living animal, it doesn't end there. That prohibition covers many other things, such as being kind to animals, being careful of our environment. It covers things such as agricultural, grafting, all sorts of things. So it's not just, that's the heading of the seventh law. but there are many bylaws that fall under that as well. So we're up to verse 5 now. So let's go ahead now and look at verse 5 because it gets interesting as we go along. Verse 5 to 7 we'll read. Now, this is where it talks, we've talked about the animals, not eating the flesh of a still living animal. Now, verse 5 goes straight in to murder. However, your blood, which belongs to your souls, I will demand. Of every beast will I demand it. But of every man, for that of his brother, I will demand the soul of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God he made man. You be fruitful and multiply, teem on the earth and multiply on it. And God said to Noah and his sons, I'm not going on to verse 8. We're just ending at verse 7. Okay, got a bit excited there. So, what is your mind telling you now about those last couple of verses? If you're saying the prohibition of murder, you're correct. But also the prohibition of murder is how shall we say, a heading. But under that, there are many things that come under the prohibition of murder. And they include, as some of you would understand, abortion, euthanasia, etc. It's a huge topic. So let's now read the Torah comments on these last few verses. So here's verse 5. The Torah places another limitation on man's right to take a life. God states that he will demand an account from one who spills his own blood. For a human being's life belongs not to him, but to God. So this is also talking about suicide as well. Though Noah had been granted authority over animal life, he had no right to commit suicide. Only God has the right to end life. So see that all the categories that come under this. Of every beast, it says, beasts too are forbidden to kill people, and if they do, they will be killed through divine means. Alternatively, this passage refers to a person who turns over another to be killed by wild beasts. Alternately, the verse refers to murder and warns that God will not permit a murderer to go unpunished. He will be hunted down by wild animals or by the hand of man. It goes on further here and it says, but of man, the verse gives another example of bloodshed that God will not condone. Someone who contrives to kill without witnesses so that he is beyond the reach of the courts, or someone who kills his brother, i.e. someone he loves so very much that the death had to have been accidental or unintentional. Now that can come, we call, accidental death done without intent. In Australia, that's called manslaughter, not murder. In such a case, too, the killer may well have a degree of responsibility due to his failure to exercise proper vigilance. And we call that duty of care. You exercise duty of care not only towards your blood family, but to all human beings. And duty of care would be the rock that a lot of safe workplace health and safety rules are built on. Duty of care. If you think that scaffolding is not as perfect as you'd like it to be, don't just say, oh, well, we'll wait and see what happens. You need to be 100% sure it is. Duty of care. Whenever a life is taken, God will inflict whatever punishment is merited according to the degree of the crime or the carelessness that led to the death. So there is a reckoning for that. So that is the end of the actual Torah comments. So now let's just take a look at what Torah Anthology says. Now bear in mind, we're seeing here that not only Ava Minahai, do not eat the flesh of a still living animal, which is the seventh law, but he's reinstating this not to murder, and that includes a wide variety of things such as suicide, accidental killing, euthanasia, etc. So we've got a reiteration of these Noahide, some of these Noahide laws right here in a few words, in a few verses. And when it is talking about, I will demand justice, then this is in direct reference to courts of law. And that's one of the positive commandments given to Noahides, that we set up courts of justice. And of course, you would all realise that we have laws against murder, we have laws against robbery, etc. There's special laws, accidental death, manslaughter. What was duty of care sufficient? Was it an unforeseen accident that couldn't have been avoided, etc.? So there we go. That's, and I remember I said the Torah doesn't waste too many words. So just in those 2 or 3 verses, there's a whole raft of references to the Noahide laws. Okay, so where am I up to here? Okay. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that when you murder someone, be it accidental or intentional, you're not only taking that one life, but you have ended that person's ability to produce heirs, so to speak, that no more heirs will come from that person. So they're not going to be able to have any more children. And so you've cut off bloods, the bloods that they would have had, so to speak, is now been taken away from them. So it's just not one life. You've taken away the ability for other life to exist from that individual. Now, we'll have a little look now. And also, when it says, in verse 7, when it says procreation and multiply upon the earth, don't forget that procreation can only happen between a male and a female. Not a male and a male, not a female and a female. Procreation in God's law is male and female, a mother and father in partnership with Hashem, our Heavenly Father. So we will just look now at Torah Anthology, and we go to 383. I think I've discussed some of those things. Yes, but down towards the bottom of 384, it does talk about suicide there and avoiding dangers. I won't go through all of it, but if you have a copy, it is interesting to read. But here it says that in relation to murder and even suicide, for this reason, God commanded the courts not to put a person to death unless eyewitnesses testify to his crime. So there's got to be evidence in today's world. You can't just say he killed so-and-so. Well, what's the evidence? Let's see it. Because there is a concern even that person could be lying, even if they admit to murder and say they're living in a state where there's capital punishment is part of their law, then he might be hoping that he'll be put to death and therefore he won't be committing suicide. I know it's a crazy way of thinking about things, but the Torah doesn't leave a stone unturned. It looks into everything. Because, that person could be depressed, but they don't want to commit suicide, but I'll pretend I've killed someone. And also suicide causes loss. Like that person now does not produce any further heirs. And it's taking a life that God gave you. So It's not the right thing to do. What else have we got here? I'll just keep up. It goes on to explain what is suicide. Well, look, it gives a good example. I won't read it word for word. Let's just say a person climbs up a tree to retrieve something, or they just climb the tree for recreation. They just like tree climbing. As a child, I climbed everything. I was climbing before I could walk. And perhaps they slipped and fell and killed themselves. That's accidental. That wasn't an intentional suicide. Someone crawls up to rescue a cat or what have you. But if someone were to say to you, I'm going to climb this tree, I'm going to throw myself out of the tree and kill myself, and they do that, then that is suicide. And naturally you would want to try and prevent it. However, most people don't give any warnings for communication alluding to that. It also goes on and says that Noah was given instructions to avoid danger. So don't deliberately put yourself in unnecessary danger. And there are rules and regulations, common sense that you take consideration for. Take care. One I'm just going to highlight here because it's something my mother did. It says it's forbidden to eat meat and fish together. My mother, it would never. In fact, she, we lived out in the bush, so we had to have more than one fridge, to store things. My mother would never store fish and meat in the same fridge together for that very reason. The fish can break down and form a bacteria, and it can make you very ill. And another thing it says, which I think all of you would know now, you don't eat fruit that's got a bite taken out of it, do you? First of all, you don't know what or who took the bite out, and bacteria has been introduced to it. So some of the things that washing our hands. The Jews were doing that long before modern day hygiene standards were instilled. So what can I say? Very interesting, isn't it? So we'll end that Torah anthology layers there. And now next week we will be going on with the covenant, the story of the rainbow, etc. And I've really enjoyed doing this series. Probably next video will be the last in this compact Genesis series, where we've looked in great depth, particularly in the flood and Noah. But there'll be something else, but I'm not going to tell you right now. So don't forget to hit the bell to be notified when there's a new video. And thank you for those of you who have subscribed. And I want you to please take care, and God bless.